Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Growth podcast. As the voiceover mentioned, I'm Bill Hupp, joined as always by my partner in crime, the founder and president of MarketWise Advising, Mike Haldane. Mike, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us on the Let's Talk Growth podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
We've talked about pricing on a previous episode. So today, let's address distribution. So, Mike, people talk about route to market. What do they mean when they use that phrase?
Sure. Before we jump into the answer to your question, Bill, I want to just maybe take a minute to step back and talk for a second about where distribution fits in. So distribution, or as it's known from a 4 Ps of marketing perspective, which is place, is kind of it's the third P, if you will. So there's product, which we've talked about a lot. There's price, which we talked about last time. There's place, which is another word for distribution or how customers buy the product. And then there's promotion, which, as we've talked about a few times now, is what everybody thinks about when they think about marketing. Big M marketing includes all of the 4 Ps. Marketing, as a lot of people think about it, is the promotion P. But today we're going to talk about place or distribution. So that's where all of this fits into the bigger discussion. So to answer your question about route to market, what do they mean by that? Well, really, it's how we take our products to the point of being available to the customer. And there are, lots of different ways to bring products to customers, and I'm sure we'll talk, in depth about all of them today. Could be through distribution. It could be a direct selling effort. It could be over the web. Could be via Amazon. It could be at a retail store. There are lots of ways to bring the product to the customer, but the key to all of that is to bring your products to where the customer wants to buy them. And, this is true of products and it's true of services, right? So when we say route to market, that's what we mean. We mean, how do we get our products from the point of manufacture, the point of origination, to the point where customers actually want to buy them.
And why is identifying the right route to market so important?
Well, it's important because you really have, if you want to succeed, you have to match availability of your products with where the customer prefers to buy your products. And again, this is products or services, but I'll use an example, kind of playing off of the car example that we used when we talked about pricing an episode ago. If, for example, that car needed gas, right? You're on a road trip and, you need gas. You want to be able to buy that product. Let's just say that you're on the interstate crossing the country. I'm probably saying that because I sat and watched the movie Vacation from the 80s with my son last night. And so it's still on my mind. But, if you're Clark and you're driving the family truckster across the country on the interstate and you need gas, you want that gas to be reasonably close to where you're going to get off on the interstate, right? So the place or the distribution point to buy that gas is important to you. And if you have a situation where, you have several options, you get off the interstate and there's one option that's right, there on the corner and another option that's 3 miles away, kind of in the middle of nowhere, that's you're going to pick the option that's closest, right? Because that's the one that is matched with where you want to buy your product. So, this is a simple example. There are more complex examples as well, and they would extend to retail and Amazon and everything else. But, actually, let's talk about Amazon for a minute. So that's an important one. So, Amazon has really changed the world in terms of how you buy products and where you buy products. So, many of us have adopted, this model of, and especially during the pandemic, but this model of, well, I can either get in the car and drive to a retail store, Target or what have you, and pick up what I need, or I can, with a couple of clicks on my phone, I can order what I need at a competitive price and have it delivered later today or tomorrow or within a few days. And, depending on the urgency of when you need it and, the selection of brands and all that sort of thing, you may pick one or the other. There's not one that's better than the other. But the point is to have your products available where consumers want to buy them. So if you only had your products available at the retail location and you had customers that, or at least potential customers that wanted to buy your product on Amazon, if that was their preferred channel, then you would want to make sure you had your products available there as well. And so, I gave kind of a couple of consumer examples, one with gas, one with other products that you might want to buy, via retail. But it's just really important as product marketers to understand where your products should be so that the customers that could be customers, prospects, are conveniently able to get what they want without having to jump through hoops that may align with what your company does, but may not align with their customer experience or their expectations for a customer experience.
Well, and what you were saying about customers, Mike, that's part of understanding the customer journey, right? You have to understand the customer profile, what their interests are, where they like to shop. That's part of understanding who you're selling to, correct?
Right. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, personas and making sure that we have a message that makes sense and that resonates with them and that's compelling and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, you have to be aware of what that customer journey is and know where they're going for information, who are they going to be talking with, where do they want to buy, at what price, what do they expect for the product to do, which feature should it have, at what price point and that sort of thing. So this is just one piece of the overall mix in terms of how you suit the needs of a particular customer or set of customers that can pick from you or other competitors that you might have.
There's obviously a lot of different marketplaces, a lot of ways you can get your product to your customer. What do you see as the advantages and disadvantages of selling direct, selling through distribution, selling via VAR, or selling online? Because all of those have, pluses and minuses. What do you see as the positives and negatives of each?
Right. So it really depends on the type of product or service that you're selling. I've been in lots of situations where we've sold the product direct, and these were instances where they were not consumer products. These were products that were sold to hospitals and clinics and that sort of thing. So you had, for example, when I was with Provation, we sold a software product. It was a clinical software product that was sold to physicians and hospital systems and those types of folks. And it was a complex sale, and some of it was as a service, and some of it was capital sale, and these were big dollars. So it was a longer sales cycle with lots of discussions explaining from an IT standpoint, from a clinical standpoint, how the product worked, how the product was supported. There was so much depth in that conversation that it only made sense to sell the products directly. And so for the most part, that's what we did. We did have some distribution partners as well that were well versed on our product and how it, mingled with their product and how the solution together made a lot of sense for some customers. But it was a complex sale, and there was a relatively contained population of prospective customers, and so a direct model made sense. Now, in other situations, selling through distribution might make sense. So it may be that you've got, 100,000 potential customers in the country. Well, with the sales team, you're never going to get to that many customers. So you need to leverage a distribution channel that has more reach. Let's just say that we're selling auto parts to kind of keep in line with what it is that we've been talking about with the car example. If you sell auto parts as a manufacturer, you're going to sell to distributors and by extension retail stores, distributors that are going to sell to auto shops and that sort of thing, and then retail stores that are going to sell to enthusiastic customers that want to do their own repairs and that sort of thing. If you're the manufacturer of, I don't know, let's just say car batteries, you're not going to sell those directly, right? You're not going to expect to have a salesperson show up on your front door selling you car batteries. You expect as the consumer that you're going to go to the auto parts store, or you're going to go to an auto mechanic that is going to order that part through distribution and then provide a service to you where they install the battery, sell you the battery, et cetera. Same thing for tires and lots of other things in that kind of example. So in those cases, you really have no choice but to sell through distribution. You just cannot have enough people on the street selling your product without working with a distributor that has, retail locations and salespeople and a whole network of ways to get products from A to B. So that's distribution. And then a VAR is kind of it's a little bit of a twist on distribution. So a VAR might buy directly from the company or they might buy through distribution, but VAR stands for value added reseller. So, VARs are especially important in areas like IT and that type of thing, where they might be able to sell you products, which they'll do, but they'll also provide a heavy dose of consulting, and maybe even project work. So they don't just sell you the product, they sell you a whole solution, but it's a solution that you can't get directly from the manufacturer. You have to get it by contracting with somebody like them because they add a huge amount of value in terms of services that they provide along with the product itself. So when I was with Intel, for example, my division sold to a VAR channel, a reseller channel that bought our products directly or through distribution, and then provided those products to their customers, which would be, businesses like law firms and hospitals and, those types of folks, who were looking for a complete solution, not just a microprocessor, for example. So, that's a viable channel. And in fact, back in the early days, back in the 90s, I worked as a VAR as part of my family's business where we sold PCs, workstations, networks, servers, and that sort of thing. We bought from distribution. We bought Intel products, as an example. We assembled a solution and then we provided that solution with a heavy dose of service as well, both up front and then on an ongoing basis. So that's the VAR channel. And then selling online is, kind of back to the example that we talked about with Amazon. But Amazon is not the only way that you do that, right? There are lots of companies that have an online store that can sell their products direct to consumers or to other businesses or whoever their market is. But Amazon is a great example of an online marketplace where you can find virtually anything that you would find at a department store or at a Target or what have you, and you can order it and have it all be part of the experience with the app, and billing's already built in and that sort of thing. So those are the main examples of how you can bring your products to market.
Bringing it back to route to market, what goes into determining the right route to market? How do you go about deciding that?
Yeah, it goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, which is you have to be sure to match what your customers' expectations are with your route to market. So if they expect to buy their products on Amazon, you need to have your products on Amazon. And if they expect to buy at retail, Target or what have you, then you need to have your products there. So it's really a function of understanding the journey that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and making sure that what you do matches what their expectations are, so that there's not a situation where they show up to a retail store, for example, expecting to see your product. They don't see it, and so they wind up buying a competitor product. Same thing with Amazon. They expect to see your product there. They can't find it. There's a million other solutions that will, maybe suffice. And if that's the case, they're likely to choose a competitor product as opposed to yours.
How much complexity is there when it comes to trying to sell internationally?
International is, for a U.S. company, it's a it's a big step in the direction of growth, but it's an important one, and it comes with some complexity that people need to be aware of. I guess what I would start with is, route to market is pretty important, and there are expectations depending on which part of the world you're talking about. And I'm going to talk really high level here because, obviously Europe is not a country; it's a set of countries in a region. But I'll start with Europe and just say that in my experience, you can work with distribution in Europe, but you really need to have some kind of a local connection if you expect to sell successfully, at least to businesses, and or governments. It's probably a little bit different with consumer products. But my experiences in Europe have all been selling, B2B or B to government. And the big lesson for me was that you really want to figure out a way to partner with a local company so that you've got that local presence, because it means a lot to those customers, once you're actually on the street trying to sell. The other alternative is to make a major investment in, a European country and have that be, have there be an engineering center or a manufacturing facility or at least a sales office there present so that they know that you're going to be there for the long run. Here's the thing with Europe and really any other, area outside of the United States, and this would be true for us buying products, from a different country as well. You want to know that the vendor that you're working with is going to be there for the long term and not just make a sale and then decide to exit the market. You want to know that they've either been there for a long time and they have a reputation in that market, or you believe that they're going to be there for a long time because they've made investments or partnered with companies that have that demonstrate that their strategy is a long-term strategy and not just I'm going to come in, I'm going to sell some product, and then I'm going to exit. So because nobody wants to be caught with, okay, I spent a lot of money on this solution and now all of a sudden the vendor that I bought it from isn't here anymore, and now I don't have support, or whatever the case may be. So that would be how I would describe Europe. And I would say that there is definitely a preference for European products in Europe. Except to say that again, if you've partnered with a European brand, there's a lot of good that can come from that as well, or if you've made major investments as an American company. Now, in the Middle East, which is kind of the next area that I've had experience with, it's a little bit different. So the same expectations are in play as it relates to longevity, right? Nobody wants to buy a product that they feel isn't going to be supported in a few years, especially when it's a big, expensive, complex product. But they are, I would say, in general, a little bit more open to American companies coming in, working with a local distributor, and buying American products. So that's what I would say about the Middle East is there's a pretty big appetite to buy products from the U.S. And I'm speaking mostly about the countries that I've done business with. So these are the Gulf states, right? So Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait. These are the countries that I've worked with in the past, and I would say that all of them have had a pretty big appetite to work with American companies. I don't have as much experience in Asia, so I don't really have a lot of commentary there. Canada and the U.S. I mean, obviously there is a line there, but there's a lot that goes with NAFTA and that sort of thing. There's a lot that goes back and forth. And there's not, I mean, to sell an American product to a Canadian customer is not a big deal, and I've done lots of that. To a lesser extent in Mexico, but obviously there's a lot of commerce that goes back and forth between the U.S. and Mexico as well. And then I have had some experience in Australia and New Zealand as well. And I would say that like Europe and like the Middle East, they like to work with American companies. Obviously, these are countries that, from a geopolitical standpoint, we're very friendly with, and there's a lot of business that goes back and forth. But again, just like other parts of the world, they want to know that if you're coming, you're going to be there for the long term, and that they're not going to be left holding the bag, after making a purchase and then having you exit. So longevity is going to be important to talk about there as well. And then there, is the whole concept around certifications and where are your products licensed to or certified to be sold and that sort of thing. So a lot of the products that I've been involved with have either been FCC approved or FDA approved, depending on the product. Some obviously FDA is healthcare oriented and FCC is radios and that type of thing. But for whatever reason, a lot of the products that I've worked with have had those designations here in the U.S., and they can be different in Europe, and or the Middle East, or Australia or what have you. So, not to get too specific here, but there are separate organizations within the EU, for example. So, as opposed to FCC, it might be that you need a CE mark in the European Union, whereas in the Middle East, they might be okay accepting FCC. So you just need to understand what the requirements are for the various geographies that you might be wanting to do business in, and then know that you're probably going to have to spend some money to get your product certified in that region or that country, based on what their criteria might be. So let's just say that you had a product that was FCC certified in the U.S. and you knew that you were going to have to get a CE mark, somewhere in the European Union. So with that being the case, what you would do, just like you did with the FCC mark, is you would contract with a vendor that would provide testing and certification for CE just like you did with FCC. And in fact, a lot of the same firms do the same types of things. So you don't have to go all the way to Europe to get your product certified. Usually you can find a firm here in the US that does CE certifications and have your product tested and certified here for sale there. So I'll just make that last comment. And by the way, I'm going to offer a disclaimer here and say that I am not a lawyer. I am not an expert on certifications and that type of thing. These are just the experiences that I've had and the things that I've seen. So I would encourage anybody interested in taking their products international to talk with the folks that are experts in terms of certifications and that sort of thing. I can speak pretty specifically to the commercial part of it, distribution and selling models and that type of thing. But as far as the rest goes, there are people that specialize in that.
You're not a lawyer. You just play one on TV.
I'm not either.
But to your point earlier, it's a massive step for a company to take to go international, but the potential payoff, the reward is great, is it not?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. I mean, I think people look at the international market and they say, well, population of the US is 330 million or thereabouts. And I can look at Europe or Asia and say, well, there's a whole another population of people or companies or government entities that I can sell to. I can double my revenue over the course of the next couple of years if I can just get my products into that market. And what I would say is that, and this is based on my experience, selling internationally can be a really feasible, really good way for a company to go in terms of how it grows its revenue, as one of many levers that companies have. However, you don't want to go into it with an expectation that it's going to happen overnight or that you're not going to have to spend any real money to make it happen. Certification, setting up channels, maybe even making investments, doing a joint venture, somehow providing evidence that you are there for the long run is important. And I've seen a lot of examples of where companies have said, yep, we want to go do things internationally. We want to start selling to some of those customers. They go having completely underestimated the effort. And a couple of years later, with maybe not as much success as they would like to see in that time period, they pull out. And then all of a sudden, once they do that, I mean, it's kind of the end of their chances to go do it again, right? I mean, once you sell and then you pull out and go back to the U.S. exclusively and leave those customers hanging, you're not going to go back 3 years later and do the same thing over again and have any credibility in doing so. So I would just say it requires effort, it requires investment, and it requires patience. And if those three things aren't in place, I would suggest, don't go down that path because it's not quick, it's not easy. It can be very, good from a growth perspective, but you've got to go in with eyes wide open.
I would also say that it requires oversight because if you're based in America and you have a bunch of regional reps, it's kind of hard to know unless you have a system in place what they're doing on a day in and day out basis. And I've heard of several companies where they had regional reps that it's just like, what have you done this last 6 months, this last year,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so I guess a couple of things there. One is that you wouldn't manage those efforts any differently than you would here in the US, right? They need to have objectives and metrics, and those need to be tracked. And, there need to be regular one-on-one meetings so that we can understand what's going on, what the roadblocks are, and that sort of thing. But the other thing is, having local presence of some sort of management layer is important as well. So I have managed people that are located outside of the US and have international roles. And I've done it from the US, but you've got a big time change difference. And, depending on what part of the world you're talking about, it can be extreme. And, you're not there every day, right? I mean, yes, I've traveled all over the world and I've traveled with, salespeople and product managers and those types of things to see what's going on, but you can't be there every week. And so to have a level of management there that's local that can pay more attention and be more in tune with what is really happening at the local level is an important piece as well.
Well, end on a fun question, Mike. You just mentioned how you've traveled all over the world, going on various sales trips and whatnot. Is there a trip or two or a place that stands out to you as particularly memorable?
Yeah, probably lots of examples of trips that I've done that have been, particularly memorable. I would probably base most of the answer to that question on the places that I've seen that have just been, from a personal standpoint, just beautiful. Prague, in Czech Republic, for example, would be an example of that. Just a beautiful city with lots of wonderful architecture and history and all of that. A lot of great learning can happen with travel. It just broadens your perspective, and whether it be for personal perspective or your business perspective, it just gives you a context that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think we'll know this podcast has arrived when we're doing a live one from some bar in Sydney or something.
There you go. That sounds like a great idea.
Goals. Anyway, that will do it for today's conversation about distribution. Mike, thanks as always for sharing your insights and expertise. I think it's going to be very helpful for a lot of people, and we'll see you next time on the Let's Talk Growth podcast.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.